So I was a valedictorian of mechanical engineering back in 2019, while I was also minoring in math at the time, so you know I was on a real nerd journey. So I thought it would be fun to go through some of my past engineering exams from a few years ago and look at what exactly I was doing to get good grades and show you guys kind of what real engineering exams look like. So in this video, we're gonna go over my study guides that I use for each exam, and then we're gonna go over 3 classes. The first one is Calculus II, which is a good math class to cover because it is like a weeder class for those engineering level courses. And then we're gonna go over Thermodynamics II, which is the second thermodynamics class that you take in college. And then heat transfer, which I think was personally the hardest engineering class I've ever taken, and then finish off with some actual tips and tricks, like not just study more, but actual physical things that I did to boost my grades. If you're new here, I'm Liz. I'm a data science manager at Intel, and I film videos really about computer science, engineering, and goals in your 20s. But again, my background's in mechanical engineering, so that's what I'm sharing today. So if you're into that, feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, let's jump into it. The first thing I want to talk about is study guides. Now, I make study guides before every exam. So every exam has a study guide, and it basically condenses all the information onto a little sheet like this here. So this is my first kind of iteration of the study guide, so you can see lots of color. I started to get lazier throughout the years, so this is kind of the prime is where they were at. It was freshman year. I made this in freshman year. The other thing is flashcards to condense your material even more, and that's because a lot of the times professors will be like, oh, you're allowed like one little index card for your exam where you can put some equations and stuff. So getting in the habit of condensing all that information onto a sheet or just a flashcard is a really good habit to get into. So in engineering, you actually have a good amount of math requirements that you have to fulfill. So you first are gonna take Calculus 1, and that's gonna be derivatives. Then you're gonna take Calculus 2, which is gonna be more integrals and series. Then you take vector calculus, and then you top it off. Final requirement is differential equations. And then you have satisfied your core math requirements in order to get your mechanical engineering degree. But we're gonna go over Calculus 2 because it's kind of in the middle, and it's one of those weeder classes. And when I say weeder classes, I mean classes that they weed out kind of the weaker engineers, the weaker math students. I know it's a terrible tactic, but it is a thing. They make those classes extra hard to kind of scare you and to think, okay, do you really want to be an engineer? So the study guide I made for these exams look like this. I used lots of color. I used green a lot. I don't know why. I think it just looked pretty. And you can see I'm just condensing information on here. Like there's lots of tests on here, and it's just kind of a cheat sheet for me to look at before the exam. So as you can see here, if you lay out my 3 exams from Calculus 2, I averaged about over 100%, I guess, if you look at it. So in some cases, you can get extra credit, either the curve or there's extra problems at the end of exams, but I was a super perfectionist throughout engineering school, so I kept like all my self-esteem and value was into these tests, so I put like my heart and soul into them, which is super unhealthy, and I do not recommend for anyone out there who just wants grades to feel good about themselves and to make themselves feel smarter, because it doesn't actually work. Okay, so the first exam is really typical for a Calculus 2 exam. You can see there's just tons of integrals, and they're just trying to get you to test your integral knowledge. You can see there's lots of different complex integrals that you're gonna do. I did them on the actual sheet itself, so you can see my work. I write really big, and I also recommend writing very clear. You can see that it's a little sloppy, but it's still pretty good. And then you can see there's more and more integrals here. I think every single one of these was an integral because it was kind of our first test to just make sure that you have like the fundamental knowledge of integrals. And then at the end, you actually have an extra credit problem, and that's how I got higher than 100%, is it was kind of a joke. And honestly, I have no idea how I even put this together. I read this like 6 times preparing for this video, and I still am like, how did I think of sea as in like the sea, like the ocean, and got this problem correct? I don't even know the creativity that I had at age, what was I, 19 at the time? So I don't know if I could have gotten that problem. Okay, now the second exam is again still more integrals, but you're doing more like geometry type integrals, if that makes sense. So they're like a lot more complicated. You can see on the second problem, I actually really messed up this one and then decided to cross it. The key here is that I didn't erase. I crossed it because I was like, oh, well, what if it's right? I'll just leave the work there. You can still see behind the X's. So that's a huge tip if you want to get like partial credit for something, never erase your work. The other thing that I noticed here is, do you see how I'm boxing on the actual problem itself? What key parts are important. So you can see the boxing and the circling, because I don't really care about the first sentence. Like, the bronzed ram shield is obtained by revolving the region. It's like blah, blah, blah. I don't care about that. What I care about is bounded by the x-axis and the actual equation. So a lot of these times the professors sometimes like to get a little excited about their exams, and they throw like, literally read this problem using the magic contained with the orb of truth, blah, blah, blah. Like, that is just distraction, right? They're trying to waste my time. So I circle and box what's important, and then I just go for it. You know, no, don't rush, but like, you don't necessarily need the really annoying like nomenclature and whatever storyline they're trying to play. Like, it's an integral, it's not that deep. Now, if we go into the next page, we have again another integral and some really annoying like storytelling here. You can see I erased a lot, but I think I knew it was like completely wrong. So I'm gonna give myself a pass there. And then the fourth question, again, more integral stuff, and there's some work. I mean, again, you're just testing integrals. 5 here, the interesting part about this exam is that I changed the nomenclature of the actual equation here. So you can see it's x of t, and I changed it to y. So I basically made y equals x of t in order to keep it straight in my mind. And then I just did the y with the double hatch to show that that's like 2. And then put it in the side, and then I wrote easier for me to understand because I was trying to solve this and I didn't want to get the x of t's all messed up. So I kept that in the back of my mind. But you can do that in exams. You can say, hey, I like your problem, but I'm going to change a little bit of it that makes sense for me. So I didn't know that I did that, like the balls that I had, where I was like, you know what, your equation sucks and I'm gonna change it. So I still got the problem right. And then again, we have another one of those general solutions problems. And then lastly, we have the extra credit, which is kind of fun. And basically it's like, which one's better, which one's easier. And so I did it both ways, and then I picked which one was the easier one. Okay, the last exam for Calculus 2 is very messy. I think it's because a lot of this was series. So I did very well because he wrote math minor ? On the top of the exam, which means that I did well because he was saying, hey, maybe you should get a math minor, which I ended up getting. So yay, thank you, Timmy Brown, for that. But these are gonna be just series problems. You're gonna use lots of different series tests. You can see, even on both sides, it's just a bunch of series problems. I decided to write on the actual test itself, and you can see how messy it was. See how I'm like boxing around to show which part is important, and so messy. So I would recommend, and later on I do this, having a sheet of paper and writing out the problem and attaching it to the back of the test. I figured out that was way easier later on, probably around sophomore or junior year of college. But you can see how messy it is. But again, it's just gonna be series after series. And the last page, just more series and integrals. So basic stuff, and there was no bonus problem on this. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to thermodynamics. I do wanna give an idea of what the homeworks look like. They are the most intense things ever. So I took thermodynamics, I think this is applied thermodynamics, so I had to have been a junior at this point. And you can see, this is a very specific paper that you're using. This is called engineering paper. It's super expensive. I don't know why they make us use it. It's super thin, it's ugly looking. Yeah, there's like these graph boxes, which is kind of nice. But this is kind of what it looks like. You're usually given a set of problems. So you can see at the top of my homework that I wrote down the problems. So 9.5, 9.14, all them. Homework 3, I put all the necessary information on here. And then you can see that you had to do like a purpose, given, assumption, solution. It had to be very structured. And they were super particular, and you had to number your freaking pages. It was just terrible. So this is what a typical homework looks like. I just want to let you guys know what to expect if you end up going in engineering. A lot of the times you have to write on this weird paper. Okay, so we're gonna go over 2 exams, but the first exam, I actually made this study guide here. So you can see Applied Thermodynamics Exam 1 study guide, and then I have basically a bunch of different cycles. So you can see a Rankine cycle, I have Carnot-Rankine cycle, regenerative power cycles, oh my gosh, reheat cycles, whatever. The important part here is that I drew it, and then on this page I showed the actual steps. So I solved a ton of problems and then realized that steps are very similar. So I put step 1, solve for H's for turbines using blah. Step 2, conservation of energy. Step 3, conservation of energy around a different thing. Step 4, you're doing a network. Step 5, entropy, whatever. But it was just important because I'm seeing the patterns and then I'm like writing them down, because that way you can do the steps in that order. And then again, I just have more examples that were heavily used in the homework. And then I have some gas power system examples. You can see a little chart down there. And then, yeah, diesel cycle and a Brayton cycle. So I basically wanted to memorize all the cycles before the exam. Okay, so now for the exam itself. So I did get the highest grade in the class, so take that. And I got like +2 points. I guess there must have been extra credit on here, or a curve. Sometimes it's both. Okay, so the first problem I should have written on a separate piece of paper because that looks freaking messy. But this is basically an engine problem. You're solving for a lot of different variables. It's really, that one actually wasn't that complicated. Okay, next problem, you're given a cycle. So again, that's why I memorized like the diesel cycle, Brayton cycle, all those cycles, and then I had that chart. So you recognize this chart here, and then you're like, where is her work? I actually learned later on that it's easier to write out the problem on separate pieces of paper and then attach it to the back of the test, because that way you're not flipping through and trying to figure out like flip back and forth, because a lot of these problems build on each other. So I just like having it on one nice blank slate, and then you don't run out of room and it doesn't get messy, and then you're like kind of panicking because you're like crossing things out, and it's a whole anxiety thing. So this is just one of those cycles. And then I attached my work to the back, which is back here, and I'm just doing conservation of energy around things and doing different states. And then I wrote it out on that nice little chart on the actual exam itself. And then the next problem on the back, he also gives you one, and he wants you to basically draw the curve. So I drew the curve. And then I attached all the work to the back and then turned it in. This exam, these exams that we did with him were so intense. I remember not even having like a spare 3 seconds to check it, turn it in. Like literally as the bell was leaving, like I'm trying to finish up. Like they were jam-packed. So next let's go over the second study guide. So this is Thermodynamics II, Exam 2 study guide. Again, you're gonna see a lot of the same thing, except for I organized this by chapters. So you can see chapter 10, refrigeration and heat pump. And then you have an example problem, which a refrigeration problem is a very common one. And how I make these study guides is, again, going through the problems over and over and over until I see patterns. And then you can see on there, you know, more chapters with more notes. This one isn't, you know, super exciting. It's just me like listing off different cases and psychrometrics, which was a terrible part of thermodynamics, which literally confused everyone. And then, bam, so that's what that study guide looked like before I took the actual exam. Okay, so this is the thermodynamics second exam to go with that study guide. The first problem I chose to draw it on here because I didn't think it was that complicated. And then again, the second problem, I wrote the word attached because I attached my work to it. And that, again, he gives you a nice little graph. You have to fill out the graph, but you see how pretty it is? Like this all checks out. And then he can look at my work if he wants to, like if I got something wrong. But you can see my work is attached, and I cross things out here and there, but I do tend to leave my work because I think it's important to just leave it there just in case, so you can get some extra partial credit, I would say. You can see a lot of the time I'm circling stuff, but I actually end up putting it on the exam front itself. It's kind of complicated to like pull it together. And then let's see, question 3 was a isothermal problem. Here we go. Oh yeah, I remember this stuff. God, terrible. This is when you're like almost in like molecular level. God, this is terrible. And so then you can see my attachment just says 3 on the back, and then I go through it. Wow, this is really messy. I must have been really rushing on this guy. And then I like to box things. I actually think I put it into, yeah, I circled stuff and I boxed stuff. That's probably not recommended, but I think he knew what I was trying to do. But again, I got 50 out of 50 on this, so I got 100% on the exam. These exams were freaking hard. Okay, heat transfer was by far the hardest class I've ever taken. It was heat transfer and mass transfer together. And this is the class that literally so many people failed. Thermodynamics, a lot of people failed. And heat transfer, even more people failed. And I was the only, I swear, I was like one of 2 people who was getting anywhere near A's in thermodynamics and heat transfer. I can't even undersell how hard these exams were. So here's the first study guide, or I guess I'm gonna show you the second exam of the class. And here is the heat transfer exam 2 study guide. And so here you actually have to draw things. You can see there's like a cylinder because you're actually doing heat transfer of like cylinders, balls, all kinds of things, like shapes, and it was very confusing. And now you're gonna start to see weird little symbols that you've never seen before, like things with stars. God, so threw me. So you're gonna see like all kinds of weird symbols that I mean, this class was just on another level. So you can see, again, it's gonna look very similar to my thermodynamics ones. I'm just doing by chapter, and I'm just, you know, high level, you know, how to calculate a Reynolds number and stuff. It's not that complicated, but just enough to condense it into a couple sheets after doing a ton of problems. Now, before I took exams, I always did practice problems outside of the homework. So I do the regular homework, which would have like a set of 20 questions. And then they would say like, oh, just do the odds or the evens, but we do the odds and evens. Okay, that's how I did it because I was doing every problem in that freaking book. Like, so I used to basically do my own homework on the side. So you can see here, I have literal just pages and pages of doing problem after problem. And that's really the only way I could get through heat transfer is I did every single problem in that freaking book. So if he made up a problem on the exam, like 90% of the time I had seen the problem in the book somewhere, and that was my only real strategy to surviving heat transfer. Okay, so let's look at the actual exam. So this one I did get higher than 100%. So on the front, this is weird. He never did multiple choice questions until like this last exam really threw me off. So I actually lost some points, but because people did so bad on this exam that I ended up getting more than 100% because it was that hard. So let's look at the first actual problem. So you can see here, he gives you lots of information, and the problem with this problem is it continued. So if you fucked up the first question, you were gonna fuck up questions 8, 9, and 10. So they built on each other, so you're kind of screwed if you didn't like at least get this going. So again, this is a lumped problem, so if you're anywhere familiar with heat transfer, you have to check if it's lumped or not lumped. That is like, if you get that wrong and you follow it through, you're screwed. Like, you're failing the test. So the first thing I did was check if it's lumped, and then the rest I actually wrote on separate pieces of paper. Again, because I like to have clean space. So again, I labeled it, I calculated some freaking numbers. It's a little messy because I was rushing because his tests were like notoriously hard and I never finished them. So 8, 9, again, so messy. If I put any assumptions, like see on here for 9, I put, you know, this is how I'm interpreting this, assume this. If there's any assumptions like that, I always put it in the exam so he knows where my head's at when I go to make the exam. There's 2 assumptions here, and then I underline the crap out of them so he can't miss them in case I get that problem wrong. But you see, like, if you look at the solution to that problem, look at that. Does that give you any like idea if you did that correctly? It is so complicated. Like, that is like a real equation. It's all messy. You're like, I could have done this wrong. Like, completely could have done that wrong. And then I think 10 built on this. It's hard to tell because this exam is like all over the place. Yeah, 10 built on that, so again, just more math, more engineering. And then he likes to do these things called bears. So let's look at the bear problem here. So he's given you a good amount of information. I should have highlighted some stuff. I don't know why I didn't grab it. I did mark out something because he put total length of blah and then told us like, oh, scratch that. I hate when professors do that. Like, fix your exam, because now you're gonna throw me off, because a lot of times I wear earplugs during exams, and if I don't hear that, I'm going downhill. But if we look at the solution to the bear, I drew out a picture. Now, I do recommend drawing pictures. I know that it takes time, especially when you're rushed to get a problem done, but drawing that picture will help you so much. Okay, so now that we've gone through my actual engineering exams, let's step back and look at some tips. So the first tip I have is to do as many problems as possible. So your professor is gonna be like, oh, do the odds from chapter 10, 14 through 20. No, you're going to do the odds and the evens. And then you're gonna do even more problems that are like not even from that range. You're gonna do the whole range. Now, you don't always have time to do all of them, but at least do more than what the professor says. Because the people who do well on exams practice and practice and practice new problems. You almost can simulate the exam by taking 3 or 4 problems, timing yourself, sitting down, move all your stuff away from you, and almost reenact the exam itself. That was the best thing that put me into exam mode, is by almost reenacting the exam before taking the exam so that I could fail when it was safe rather than fail when it counted. The next tip is to make study guides. So you saw my study guides, they're colorful, they summarize things. You can only do that after you do a bunch of problems, because you'll start to see the patterns. You'll start to see, oh, for this type of problem, I do 1, 2, 3 step here. For this type of problem, I do 1, 2, 3 step here. So you're starting to see the patterns, and those will putting those down and writing them out will help you when you get to the exam. You go, oh, that's right, this is a Brighton cycle. I need to do X, Y, and Z. My next tip is to write out everything on a separate piece of paper and attach it to the back of the exam. This will take less time, you'll have a blank slate, you can write bigger, your anxiety goes down because you're not trying to cram everything in there. Like 10 out of 10, recommend doing that. My other tip is to box things that matter in the exam. So when you start reading the actual problem itself, they'll start to confuse you with the storytelling of the problem. I don't care about the storytelling, okay? I'm here to solve a problem. Give me the units, give me blah. And once you see units in Kelvin, you're like, oh, that's temperature. What are the temperature problems that I know in the back of my head? You start to see things when you start boxing what exactly you're given in a problem. Okay, last tip, wear earplugs. If you're the type of person who gets distracted by hearing pages flip, so you start the exam, you're about 30 seconds in and somebody goes, how are you done with the exam? How did you flip that page? We're 30 seconds in, you start panicking. You're like, am I not smart enough? Did I not do things? Did I overthink something? So wear earplugs, just pop those babies in and you can't hear anything. And then you're just tunnel visioned in. I will say though, if your professor makes an announcement partway through the exam, sit in the front row so you can hear it, because that has gotten me a couple times where they wrote something on the board and I was so focused on the exam, I didn't look up and see. But I highly recommend earplugs if you're that kind of person. Now, I mentioned in the beginning of the video that I transitioned from mechanical engineering into data science. So I will link up here the video where I talk about how I did that transition and also the steps to go into computer science and data science. Otherwise, I will see you guys next time.